I feel like Stretch has this way of expanding beyond what is considered a traditional classroom, a composition classroom. And so the students have more of an opportunity to sort of engage in different kinds of writing instead of just getting to, let's say, an essay.
We talk a lot in the beginning about kind of the culture shock of coming from high school into the university. And actually, the Stretch program itself has helped a lot with that because students are coming in with a little more confidence because they know they're getting credit for both semesters in their courses. And I feel like we've gotten kind of rid of that negative connotation of remediation because these students are in their composition course. It's just section A and then section B. So that helps too, explaining them why the course is set up in the way it is, telling them that we're all going to be together the whole entire year, I think really helped them kind of take more risks than they normally would have in the courses before.
The most important aspect of freshman Stretch is the cohort 2-semester structure of it, in that teachers, supplemental instructors, and students get to stay together for about 35 weeks instead of 15.
Knowing that I and my students had an entire year to get it right, I noticed with my students even that their anxiety level dropped immediately within the first week because they didn't feel like, oh my God, I must be a perfect writer in the end of one semester, knowing that we were going to set a foundation in the first semester and then expand on that in the second semester just really created a nice tone for the classroom.
Actually, my students are already saying, am I going to have you next semester, right? Because they feel, and it's not just me, it's the SI leaders, it's the other students, and this cohorting creates this environment of being comfortable because writing is personal, right? And so you need to be feeling comfortable in the environment that you're in to continue. And so I think this cohorting is a great idea.
How I handle 1.1 is, that's the first exercise of the class. So I give them a really tough reading, something difficult to read, something that will drive them crazy. And then I ask them to summarize it. We then bring those summaries to class and we have a discussion. And it's really interesting to see how, though the summaries are basically the same, students get different things out of those readings that we assign. They focus on different items in the assignment, and that's where we get our first lesson. We don't all read and see the same things, even though we're reading the same text. And then we can begin that discussion on rhetoric.
The notion of summary is one of the important parts about critical reading. If they understand it, then they can summarize it, right? So I use the summary as a critical reading exercise. We sort of identify like the main arguments, what are the main points of a topic, and then be able to sort of teach my students how to just not identify these things, but at the same time put it in their own words. If they can put it in their own words, then we have some critical reading happening.
I actually moved the summary to the last exercise to prepare them for their essay so that they would have to think about, okay, when I set up my introduction and my essay, how much summary do I need to give my reader to understand what I'm responding to?
What's really great about the letter to a friend and letter to a family member is it's really teaching the notion of audience. I introduce my students to rhetoric that way. I use an exercise from John Bean's rhetorical reading and just to introduce the notion of exercise and how you adjust yourself as you write depending on your audience so that when they go into the letter writing, letter to a friend or family, letter to the author, they themselves understand the moves that they're making, the changes, the adjustments they're making in terms of the letters because of who their audience is.
That's the first question they ask is, I've never written a letter to an author. What do I do? And I tell them, pretend you're writing a letter to a celebrity after you just watched a movie that they made. What would you say to them? Would you be a fanatical fan who seems, sort of stalkerish, or are you going to be complimentary and, be very admiring of them? What does it feel like to write to someone a letter, someone you don't know? And I said, if you had to text someone that you didn't know, how would your language be different than if you were texting your friend?
I think the best way we kind of were able to get our students to understand genre and be able to kind of identify what they were in fact doing in those pieces were when we were having them write, let's say, a letter to the author.
Yeah.
They knew who their audience was, and they absolutely knew what they should say in order to get a response from that author, and maybe, you know, what they should not say to that particular audience.
I do a response paper. This is actually where I introduce the idea that response is not just yes or no, right? This is where they need to attempt to try to really convince their audience to say maybe, to sort of gain a nuanced understanding of the world, and definitely that they're basing it on a response to an essay or to an article that they've picked. I think reiterates that idea that it's an ongoing conversation. They're entering a conversation. It's nothing new, but rather they're adding on something new to something that's already ongoing.
So I focus on introduction and concrete thesis statements, clear thesis statements. I focus on organizing the essay and structure. So I start there with a very nuts and bolts approach, and then later in the second and third progressions, then we can start expanding and playing with language a little more.
So far, I've been able to take the progression exercises and use them quite effectively to scaffold my essay assignments. And as I continue teaching the stretch program, I expect that those connections will be made stronger. I'm always learning things from my own methods, from the responses I get back from the students, and looking for ways that I can make those assignments more effective. So far, I'm exceptionally pleased with the results.